Сайн байцгаана уу хүн төлөвчтэй. Өнөөдөр манай де факто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор НҮБ-ын Шилжин хөдөлгөөний байгууллагын төслийн менежер Монголд ажилладаг юм байна. Виктор Лутенко гэж хүн оролцож байна.
Виктор Лутенко нь нэгдсэн үндэсний байгууллагын шилжилт хөдөлгөөний байгууллагын Монгол дахь салбарын хөтөлбөрийн менежерээр ажилладаг бөгөөд хөгжлийн хөтөлбөрийг боловсруулах, зохицуулах, хэрэгжүүлэх, хянах үнэлэх чиглэлээр 15 жилийн туршлагатай шилжилт хөдөлгөөнд онцгой анхаарал хандуулан ажилладаг. Англи, Орос, Итали, Румын хэлээр чөлөөтэй ярьдаг, Харвардын Кеннедийн сургууль, Молдав улсын их сургуульд магистрийн зэрэг хамгаалж, Миннесотагийн их сургуулийг Фулбрайт, Хамфри тэтгэлгээр сурч төгссөн. Виктор Лутенко нь Молдав улсын 2 ерөнхий сайдад нийгмийн болон хөгжлийн бодлогын зөвлөхөөр ажиллан Молдав улсын засгийн газрын харьяа гадаадд байгаа Молдав улсын иргэдийг дэмжих, тэдний эх орныхоо хөгжилд оруулдаг хувь нэмрийг нэмэгдүүлэх төв агентлаг болох диаспорагийн харилцааны товчоог үүсгэн байгуулж удирдсан. Мөн Молдав улс дахь хамгийн нөлөө бүхий think танкуудын нэг болох Европын бодлого шинжлэлийн хүрээлэнгийн үндэслэгчийн нэг юм.
So, good afternoon.
Hello.
Well, let's talk about the issue you have focused in Mongolia. I understand there is a new program starts after you have substantially made a study about the migration problem, internal migration of Mongolia. So what is that project about, please?
So overall, we try to focus on decreasing the vulnerability of the internal migrants in Mongolia.
Vulnerability.
And we try to attack it from 3 perspectives. The first one, we're trying to help the government to get better data on migration, on internal migration in Mongolia, especially considering that we do have a lot of people in Mongolia who are not necessarily registered. They don't have their residency registered, and by that, very often, for the purpose of public services, they become invisible for the state. Secondly, we're working with the government on improving the policies, making sure that the development planning of Mongolia, the social welfare, the educational policy, they do take into account not just migrants, but also the movements that are happening internally from the SUM level to IMAG, from one IMAG to another, and also to Ulaanbaatar. And thirdly, we are looking at providing direct assistance to the migrants, be it with informational services, be it with services at the local level. So I'm focusing very much on training specialists, public servants at the Horo level in Ulaanbaatar, but also working with SUMs and BUGs in the countryside. And we're also working with NGOs, strengthening their capacity to deliver psychosocial support to existing migrants, but also to prospective ones.
This is one of the really top priority issue of Ulaanbaatar city. And according to one of your information, some 39,000 people were migrated from countryside to Ulaanbaatar city in alone 2020. And that trend was about the same level, I think, from 30 to 40,000 a year before, and the year before for last over maybe 10, 20 years. And I thought this would, it could be addressed long ago, not now. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree with that.
And what happened because we are addressing the issue so late?
Well, I think migration, especially internal migration, is kind of so part and so intrinsic to the Mongolian culture that at a certain moment becomes invisible. Like people are moving, but I think the movement, it becomes more and more relevant, or became more and more relevant as Mongolia moved towards the market economy, and then the labor market started to be important in terms of the human capital, the human potential that is there. So migration movement became very important, especially from the labor market perspective. Definitely, this issue had to be addressed much earlier on. And kind of the biggest, probably the paradigm here is if you let things go naturally, the migration will flow naturally, but that won't be necessarily supporting your economic development. So migration is very much about how well do you understand it and how well do you plan interventions and how orderly can migration be, including in the internal market, right, internally in the country. So I think what's outstanding and what's really necessary is that the government pays more attention towards making the internal migration, the internal movements orderly, so that, for example, on the labor market, you don't only have the mobility of skills, right? Because you have the vocational and technical education, you have university, you have schools, so you try to prepare your human capital that fits into the economic structure of the country, into the labor market. So very often you have to have the system quite flexible, right? Because you have to ensure that people, you are kind of growing a specific number of professionals in a field, but then the international market change, the local market change, you have to ensure that these people can be requalified so that they move into another profession, right? But at the same time, you want to develop also the regions. You also want to create different poles of development. So you need not only skills mobility, you also need geographical mobility. And you cannot count on the fact that you will open a factory there and people will just go there. Are you getting the right people? Are you getting the right qualification? Are you getting the right age? Are you sure people will stay there based on what? Just on the factory? Not necessarily. So that's why having an organized internal migration is, I think, for Mongolia, kind of a key element of the development policy, especially of the regional development policy and human development policy.
Is there a particular the system change issue? We had the centrally planned economy, then we have now private sector-based economy, and people now not like before, state chooses what to do, what to develop in the region, now the private sector. Then the issue comes about the feasibility of the businesses that would run in the regions, right? In particular, it's such a large territory and relatively close to other countries' regions. How to get the regional development making really senses for people to stay there having the same level of life like in Ulaanbaatar city, or I mean, basic things what the people need in the cities. To that end, have you been studying the regional development policy of the country? Which, I mean, not so good, but still there is some attempt.
We did start working on that, and we are now working more intensely with the National Development Agency, and actually kind of the projections and the estimation, the vision that they have for the future in terms of regional development, we're making sure that internal migration is actually part of that. So when they look into the development in the next 10 or 20 years, like which regions should focus, they should focus more, because, as you said, the country is big, the resources are scarce. So there should be a prioritization. So when they choose the points where to focus, budget investments and human capital investments, we're also trying to reflect the internal migration dimension. How could these places benefit from people coming from elsewhere, from where exactly? And also, one of the approaches that we are experimenting, if you want now, exactly because Mongolia is so big in terms of the territory. So if you want, you can apply the same concept. Sometimes I'm thinking about Mongolia as an European Union, right? Different countries is just these are IMACs. So just because of the distances and the way they are interacting to each other, you can apply some of the principles or practices from international migration, like how IMACs cooperate and exchange labor based on their comparative advantages, and how this can be done as it would happen, for example, with the international exchange of labor. Because, let's say, you do have a big development, mining development in Umngove, right? If there is nothing organized, then what will happen? People just from everywhere will try to get jobs there. So what's happening when I'm going to Sukhbatar and I'm talking to people in Seleng, they're telling, look, we have like 1,000 deficit in labor in the high season in agriculture just because these people went to Umngove. Now we have to get these people from somewhere else, from Hoofdhoofd, from the Hoofdskool, the IMACs, which are closer to us. So what you have is because migration is not organized, you have these flows of people creating deficits in different fields that are strategic for Mongolia.
So
mining, agriculture.
That's one of the main purpose of this year-long program you just now start in the whole country, giving an information where the people need labor, what would be the salary, how long it will be needed, whether you need to go completely move with your family there, or you can just be temporary working in the area. That's the database you are creating, I understand. Am I right?
That's just the start. So what we're doing now, we're trying to convey to the people the need to get registered, the need when you move to be very well informed, to be informed about the economic opportunities, the budget for moving around, the implications for the family. So we are trying to get like a personal approach to that. But in parallel, we're working with the government exactly on what you're saying, so that we can organize the migration process in a way so that it's beneficial for the people, but also for the economy.
From when the people in a region, say in Western IMAX, practically and how, will know how they can make better money during, say, particular seasons?
Well, if
where? Which website?
We are still working on that, so I cannot say that there is like a particular program for people to move now that is very well organized by the government with our support. So we're still working on that. But even now, like we cannot just tell people like you sit there and wait, right? Because there are some economical pressure, family pressure on these people to move. So what we're saying now is one of the basic elements that you have to do is to be very well informed before moving. You cannot just be here today and just take a decision, okay, tomorrow I'll just move out. And we see a lot of cases like
That's
this.
what they do, yes.
That this is happening. And what follows after that is that these people, instead of getting richer because they find a job, instead of contributing to the economy, they're going down. They're becoming more vulnerable, they're settling in one hasha, 3 families, they're exposing children to different risks. They do create the issues, as you mentioned, air pollution or traffic problems, just because these movements are very sudden and not sufficiently informed. So we think ground zero to start like very good policies, to have a very good information.
Which Mongolian agencies are involved in this regard? Because it's for the guy who is coming to Ulaanbaatar city, he's getting settled in outskirts of Ulaanbaatar, in particular places where there were no plan to have these Gir districts. Mm-hmm. This is the way how Gir districts are increasing in this country. Which organizations are involved? Would they know that they can, for sure, they move Ulaanbaatar city, they will have a piece of hasha, or at least to know exactly where you can get it easier?
So the organization we're working is first of all the municipality of Ulaanbaatar. And then it's the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection and also the General Authority for State Registration. For this campaign, these are the main institutions we're working with. You're right, but the way you describe migration, it fits like maybe 5 years ago. So the trend's already changed. I'm sure you can feel as a citizen in Ulaanbaatar that kind of the receiving capacity of the city decreased substantially. So the Gir areas are not necessarily expanding as they were in the last 20 years mostly, right? What's happening is they're growing inside. So people are arriving into the same hasha, at least initially. And the most recent trends that we're seeing is that all basically the new urban development that is happening, the new apartments that are being built, very much are absorbed not from the people from Gir areas, who are like advancing in their living standards, but they're absorbed by the new migrants. So whatever, a lot of new migrants are moving directly into apartment, we're seeing that the age of the new internal migrants into Ulaanbaatar is decreasing a lot. So it means that mostly the tendency is for the people, as long as they graduate from the high school, and they're moving into a next level of education, or they're moving into the labor market, they're doing it by coming to Ulaanbaatar. But they're settling not so much in Gir areas anymore, but they're settling in the apartment.
So with these changes of dynamics and age, population, demography dynamics, then what would be the government policy of development, urban development, let's say, or labor preparations to other businesses. So kind of they are creating a better database, I understand. And there is, for example, a tendency, or everybody is promising to move universities from Ulaanbaatar cities, for example. Whether it is based on a right to research or not, we don't know, or it is just political decisions that our government unfortunately does a lot. What is your attitude to this issue of inside of what you do?
You know, our attitude is, here we work for the Mongolian people, but with the Mongolian government. So there is a clear kind of division of labor. You select the government, we work with the government.
The government, whatever selected.
So, but the message that we're trying to put forward to the government is, these new ideas are very much appreciated, but do count on us for the research. Do count on us for the evidence. Do count on us for digging deeper and understand the implications. So in the moment that we saw that the idea of moving universities to the countryside is gaining traction, again, we went to the Ministry of Education and started a discussion about, let's work together on the implication. Let's work together on the planning, on understanding, like, first of all, when decision is taken, how many students would actually just change to another university because they just don't want to move, right? How can we work with students? How can we motivate them to change their place and to study in other places? What will happen in those other places, be it Darkhan or some other places? What will be the impact on the rental, on the just apartment market? What will be the impact on the economy? How can this impact be made or pushed more into the positive direction? Because, you know, this type of movement has a lot of implications.
Somebody doing that now?
They are doing that. They are working on that. This is not a new idea, right? So there has been work on that, but I think we can do more. And just moving it just from a kind of a virtual thing of, let's just take these people and move from here there, into a much more complex and well-thought policy work. And our permanent message to the government is that we are ready to help with that. Exactly as it is now, like one of the new policy that is getting traction is the movement of the so-called reverse migration, right? The movement of people from Ulaanbaatar to countryside. There was another message that we are passing to the government. We are ready to help. There is not so much experience in the world with that, by the way. So a lot of things that will be done now in Mongolia will be quite a premiere at the global scale.
How old is your UN organization, by the way?
UN
Migration Office.
Oh, in Mongolia we're celebrating 10 years this year.
Yeah, but overall?
Overall, we are 70 years old, celebrating this year.
Well, I'm asking because based on those policies, and then we will see different kind of diversification of economy, different say, concentration of population in different areas. In particular now when we are creating, they say, satellite cities to Ulaanbaatar. And now I think Ulaanbaatar is entering into quite new phase of development in terms of infrastructure. Now new railway line goes around Ulaanbaatar city, new airport in the Maidar city, Aero city. With all this together, do you see major policy change towards internal migration of Mongolia?
Absolutely, absolutely. These projects and also the so-called mega projects that are thought outside Ulaanbaatar, right, in the regions, this will definitely influence a lot the migration or the movements. But the message that we're trying to pass is, don't do these projects so that people move in some other way. Think how to motivate people movement as part of these projects. If you're building the cities, think about the infrastructure, think about the motivational issues for the people movement, so you get it in an organized manner. So it's not spontaneous, but it's really helping your purposes, being an urban development or being economic development of some specific, like, you know, production facilities that you're doing. And I think the government is more and more open to that, and we do find a lot of understanding in the Mongolian government now for this, and we will intensify working, because even if you want the most recent kind of development ideas that come from other international partners, right? Working on existing supply chain, working on future supply chains, so that as much of additional value of products is being produced in Mongolia, so that, you know, businessmen get more, the national economy gets more. One of the important dimensions of that is the human factor, is the labor force. So migration becomes important not just as we started as dealing with the vulnerability factors, but going beyond that. How can migration support the development? How can migration be the part of the mechanism that is supplying that labor force that is needed for these projects to go forward?
Can we touch other aspect of migration happening in this country? Since the freedom arrived to this country, people travel all around the world. Many Mongolians now, some say that about even 200,000 Mongolians live abroad. Many in Korea, North America, Europe. So it is a kind of international migration of Mongolians. As you were an advisor in Moldova, your native country, to the Prime Minister, you have created the Diaspora Relations Bureau to help those who are abroad, Moldavians, and that also to leverage their assistance, because now those 200,000 people living abroad in Mongolia, you know, every day around 800 to 1,000 to $1 million they are sending back to the economy, supporting the parents who increasing their purchasing power. So in that regard, from your experiences, what this country can do for better?
Well, you're absolutely right. I think there are 200,000 at least, if not to account for, you know, those in a regular situation and so on. Let me quote a World Bank report that was issued at the end September, I think, last year. It's called From Mines to Minds, right? So this report was talking about we should focus on the human capital in Mongolia. We should focus on retaining human capital, on developing human capital. And one of the dimensions that this report was bringing forward is we need the human capital also of the Mongolians abroad. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to return back all the Mongolians. You know, it happens, and it's not just a Mongolian reality, it's everywhere in the world. Sometimes nationals of the country from abroad can do for their country of origin much more than they would be able to do if returning back. Good point. Because of their position, because of the money that they're making there, because of the knowledge that they've got there, because of the universities they work on or companies they are in. So, you know, just appealing for the return is not sufficient. How do we open corridors with the relationship with these people so that, first of all, and it's always a two-way street, Mongolia helps these people because many of them are in a difficult situation. Many of them need their rights to be protected, needs to be supported in their vulnerable situation. We saw this very well during these COVID times, right? Yeah. But the kind of
not much help from the COVID.
The two-way street in this case is how do we also open corridors so that these people can contribute back, not necessarily to the country in general, but to their community of origin, to the place they came, to their Sum, IMAG Center, Ulaanbaatar, a specific dimension of the economy in which they now specialists. So for that to happen, there should be a central agency. Also because migration is never like just a social issue or an economic issue or an educational issue or you know, urban planning issue. It's everything together. It's everything together. So you need a central thinking body and a central operational body.
From the total sum point of view, those people living abroad are not receiving, not being a burden on the social infrastructure here. They take care of themselves there, and plus they send money. From that perspective, purely from economic perspective, balance perspective?
Purely from economic perspective, I think already for a couple of years, let's call it Mongolian diaspora, is economically significant for Mongolia. Let's just mention the remittances that you were saying. In 2019, we were looking at more than $500 million that were sent by Mongolians from abroad back to Mongolia. If you compare it, I could say that Mongolia is receiving more money from its citizens abroad than from selling its gold, which makes the Mongolians abroad more valuable than the Mongolian gold.
Good point.
I'm trying, it doesn't happen suddenly. These people won't just come, back to Mongolia or, dedicate resources, their time, which is also very valuable. Especially now that there is a certain level of, maybe lack of confidence. As you said, there is an opinion abroad that the government wasn't doing maybe enough during the COVID time. Although, from our own perspective, because we've helped about 800 people during this time to return back, and these were the most vulnerable Mongolia. So we were working very close with the MFA. And I have to say, in my experience, I can hardly find more hardworking and more dedicated people, to supporting the Mongolian abroad. So you have to really be proud of the Consular Department and Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the work that they've done. But they had to work in certain circumstances, in certain pressure factors. That is COVID, that is the limitation of the quarantine facilities. Could this work be done better? Of course. If they would have a chance to go into another year, they would probably apply a lot of lessons learned, a lot of good practices that they understood this year. This year was new for everyone.
Yeah, let's talk about this year. COVID-19 have given some experiences which otherwise we could not accumulate. So this is it's like any things, challenges and tests, and then what COVID-19 had given us, what kind of lessons in this migration situation, be it international or domestic?
That's a very good question. First of all, I think it told everyone in Mongolia, it reminded that there are citizens abroad. I think citizens abroad, they were people knew about that, but were not really thinking. So COVID-19 brought up the issue of the Mongolians abroad to a completely different level. And I think it would be very good now that the Mongolian government just basically surfs the wave, right? Now that this issue got so much traction, let's invest more. Again, let's invest more on protecting the Mongolian citizen abroad, and we're working with MFA, for example, to make the consular services electronic. There is a big movement now to put a lot of services on the e-Mongolia so they're accessible not just for the Mongolians inside the country, but also those outside the country, including the digital signature and so on. So let's make more in order to protect the citizens abroad. And let's open more and more channels so that they can contribute back, be it investments, starting a business, working with the government as advisors, the collaboration between the knowledge and scientific community and so on. Secondly, I think that what COVID did also is to signal about the vulnerability of some specific groups in the ghetto areas. In the spaces in which we have the internal migrants, especially those unregistered, those who are invisible to the governments, even to the local governments. After the November 11 lockdown, we really mobilized to help families in Ulaanbaatar, but also in Darkhan, in Erdnet. So we saw how our work in really focusing on that kind of opened a little bit the eyes also to the local administration in terms of the needs of these people. So I think COVID was also an important call for the overall social welfare and overall social protection system. And I think that is going to, and I see that it's being built into the response program of the government, including the 10 trillion program. Mm-hmm. There is an idea which is completely in line with what we're trying to promote. How do we build back? But how do we build back better?
Better, yep. Well, that's the note I wanted to end the interview, because at the end, we should go out with better knowledge, with better implementation, and most importantly, better service to the citizens. And your job, what you do now, is so important, and I wish all the related Mongolian agencies get learning the right lessons and do together much better than it was before. And I hope with this COVID-19 made this e-governance of Mongolia made a little bit forward, and even they say now they will have Ministry of e-development, etc. So let's hope for better days ahead, and thank you very much for implementing this project in Mongolia and sharing your knowledge. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. За, хүн төзөгчтэй өнөөдөр бид Монгол улсын нийгэм нүүрлээд байгаа дотоодын болон гадаадын нүүдлүүд байна. Энийг одоо яаж судалж тоо баримтыг бүрдүүлж байгаа тухай мэрэгжлийн ийм НҮБ-ын байгууллагатай ингээд монголчууд засгийн газар ажиллаж байгаа юм байна. Энэ тухайг нарийн мэдээллийг та бүхэн өөрсдийнх нь тэр вебсайтаас үзэж болох юм байна. Одоо ямар ч гэсэн мэдээлэлтэй мэдлэгтэй нүүж баяа. Хаашаа явахаа маш сайн төлөвлөё гэсэн ийм бүрийн мэдлэгийн аян өрнүүлж байгаа юм байна. Эдгээр Нүүх, Суух, судалъя гэдэг нэрт. Тийм учраас энэ төсвийг хэрэгжүүлж байгаа энэ НҮБ-ын Шилжилт хөдөлгөөний байгууллагын менежер ноён Виктор Лутенко той ярилцлаа. Баярлалаа.